Okay, so I wasn't on yesterday, but you guys on the other side saw my post, and then after that, she came over. I didn't even know she was coming. I actually saw my car. I didn't even realize. I thought like it looks like my car down the street because I took a bag of trash out, and then I checked like in the mailbox. Like it's a yellow convertible. Like I think probably had the top down. And they were pulling the top up, maybe. Like I don't know my car, but anyway. Um. So um she was here a while working, and the kid, she calls him, the guy that she gets the card from to give her money anyway. He stayed in the car, and he was, like, cleaning out there. He fell asleep, I guess. We were inside. She was cleaning in the bathroom. I was going through cleaning in my bedroom while she was working in there, but I'd get her things that she would need, like, something to stir a mixture, for the where I showed you in the shower. Um It's not done, so I can't show you an after, but I can show you, like, an in between because she still needs to come back, do more of that. Also, the toilet's still outside and those wooden things from the Lowe's. Um, but there was a lot of work that got done, and so she was here until pretty late, well after the show would be over. Um, and then today, I was talking to my sister a lot because I had talked to her yesterday. She was like, "Please call me tomorrow." So she is doing a course. It's at a discount right now because it's her first time. She wants to try to do it 4 times a year. It's 6 weeks. She asked me if I would do it. Um, so mine would be for free, obviously, kind of like a secret shopper, except not secret. Oh, I love you too. Why are you mad? Never noticed that. Um, let's see. Okay. Um, not timeout. So starting next Wednesday at 3 in the afternoon. So if you don't see me around on the other side between 3 and I don't know, was it like an hour on my time? So then that's what I'm doing. Her organizing, decluttering course that she's doing. You wouldn't think, right, that might have a sister that's like this. And this is how I am. Um so, so try to get my shoe on right. I did miss her. And then today, I guess she was here. I didn't see her. I only saw her boyfriend. He scares me. He really scares me. I saw him outside with a cigarette or something, and I thought I heard her kind of vaguely like, but I don't know. I didn't see her. But she texted me asking for some money, and saying like she was on her way, and the truck was bumpy. So I was like, the truck. She's not in my car then. So but oh, sorry, my sister's wrote me something. Not anything emergency. I'm just gonna say yes. Okay. Gotcha. I had a question. Okay. What else? Want me to call? How are you guys doing? I know you think I shouldn't complain, but keep in mind it gets 50s degrees here. You guys can see my weather at night, and it gets so cold, and I don't have heat that's working. I'm thinking maybe if I hire somebody to come and look, maybe I can be on the phone with my sister during that. So, because I get worried if they'll say words I don't know what they mean, and then I'll just go along with whatever they want, and I get nervous to do things, so then I don't do them. Um, anyway, because I made hot coffee, and I have one of my perfect waters over there. Uh, oh, Monday was rough. Yesterday, people grumpy because they're cold. They'll be like, "Mm." Um, oh yeah, so I didn't see her. She just texted me again for money before, but I was worried like she was gonna be coming in for the hours so late that we wouldn't get much done and I wouldn't miss the show. So I was glad that maybe she'll be in tomorrow. maybe, or at least hopefully next week. Because at least hopefully I get the toilet in from outside at some point. But better to be when she can be in a better position to not drop it on the ground and shatter it. Ah, so, my arm still hurts. But I I was wearing a hat before. Yeah, I wear a hat. um, but it started itching my forehead, so I'm like, you know what? Look at a warmer and I probably should have lit some of those candles because they will warm it up too. But I got this this hoodie. It says greatness. Um, and we were just left it off on the beginning of part 3, which is realism. Um, Sunday. So we're gonna begin on chapter 4. If you are ready, I'm so happy to be here. I know I look like a slobbly, but it's been a long. I was gonna say it's been a long, and I was gonna be like day, week, no, yeah, like okay, time. Like it's been a long time. Like, see, you sit your butt down. You have your reindeer. No, wait, she must have brought it up here. Go on, go on, go on. And she's like, no, I'm gonna lay down here. Do what you want. Okay, put this on for a second. Lip mask. Oh, I'm gonna try to heat the pool. Maybe I'll do a reading. I don't think tomorrow, but later this week, maybe like Friday. Well, Friday wouldn't read. I tried to heat the pool. It's not. That's not from the other heater, so it should have worked. As I know it's weird, but that's the only way I can get warm. The blanket or the pool mat, possibly. Not even the stove. I used to love to like bake something, but my stove doesn't work. Actually, that's why I gave her months ago my Pillsbury cinnamon rolls I was gonna make for the holiday because I couldn't make them because I don't have an oven anymore. The inside part, so just to warm the house. Oh, oh, all right. Oh, and you brought a biscuit. Great. Slob. Look at biscuits all over me. Mm, why is this so shaky? Looks like it's twisted. No, no, we're good. Let me pull you up. Ugh. In the blind spot of the mind's eye. Remember the show Blind Spot? Wait, am I thinking of the wrong show? Is it the one with the tattoos, right? I had a good first season. Yeah, I don't remember after that. Ugh. Mm. Hey guys, I see you. John, 64 there. That's cold. And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown. Bill, we can't hear over the chopping. This is pig. That's okay. Mm. The poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream. this much we know for sure. Adolf Fischer did not organize the riot. He did not incite the riot. In fact, he was nowhere near the riot the night the policemen were killed. But his labor union had challenged the stranglehold that Chicago's powerful industrialists had on the men, women, and children who toiled in their sweatshops toward the end of the 19th century. And that union needed to be taught a lesson. So, Adolf Fischer was tried and, on the basis of paid and perjured testimony, sentenced to die for a crime he did not commit. On November 11, 1887, he stood on the gallows and surprised everyone with his last words. "This is the happiest moment of my life." A few seconds later, the trapdoor beneath his feet fell away. The rope snapped his neck, and he was dead. Fortunately, his dreams of equity in the American workplace. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Got up to 20. My sister's showed me outside. She's like, her door opens inward. She's like, otherwise, if we snowed in, you wouldn't be able to push it out. And her dog, Hugo, um, the snow was higher than him, 19 inches. Anyway, she said, "Did I tell you it's -11?" And I was like, "Oh my God. If it was 11, that would still be really cold." And I said, "And it would be a lot warmer." And she's like, "Yeah, it'd be over 20 degrees warmer." So that's what I think of if we were 20. Like, geez. If it was double that, I'd be so cold. His dream of equity in the American workplace were not so easily exterminated. 1 year after Fisher was hanged, a bright young fellow perfected the process of dry photography, launched his revolutionary Kodak camera, and instantly became one of the richest men in the world. In the decades that followed, George Eastman developed a revolutionary management philosophy as well, giving his employees shorter hours, disability benefits, retirement annuities, life insurance, profit sharing, and ultimately 1/3 of the stock in his company. On March 14, 1932, the beloved inventor and humanitarian sat down at his desk, wrote a brief note, neatly capped his fountain pen, and smoked a cigarette. Then he surprised everyone by killing himself. Fisher and Eastman are a fascinating contrast. Both men believe that common laborers have a right to fair wages and decent working conditions, and both dedicated much of their lives to bringing about social change at the dawn of the industrial age. Fisher failed abysmally and died a criminal, poor, and reviled. Eastman succeeded absolutely and died a champion, affluent, and venerated. So why did a poor man who had accomplished so little stand happily at the threshold of his own lynching, while a rich man who had accomplished so much felt driven to take his own life? Fisher's and Eastman's reactions to their respective situations seem so contrary, so completely inverted, and that one is tempted to chalk them up to a false bravado or mental aberration. Fisher was apparently happy on the last day of a wretched existence. Eastman was apparently unhappy on the last day of a fulfilling life. And we know full well that if we had been standing in either of their places, we would have experienced precisely the opposite emotions. So, what was wrong with these guys? I will ask you to consider the possibility that there was nothing wrong with them, but there is something wrong with you and with me too. And the thing that's wrong with both of us is that we make a systematic set of errors when we try to imagine what it would feel like if. Well, I mean, obviously, there's something wrong with somebody who killed himself. Like, obviously, that didn't feel well. I mean, I don't know, maybe he knows something we don't. What are you doing? What are you doing? Look, go lay down. Stop mudding. Thank you. Go back in bed. Leave me alone. Imagining. Do you want to go out of there? Do you want to go in the other room? No, you want? Mm-mm. Mm. Is that what you want? Go on. Go on. Well, I did leave the blanket warm. Okay. Oh no. Oh no. Stop whooping. Imagining what it would feel like if sounds like a fluffy bit of daydreaming, but in fact, it is one of the most consequential mental acts we can perform, and we perform it every day. We make decisions about whom to marry, where to work, when to reproduce, where to retire, and we base these decisions in large measure on our beliefs about how it would feel if this event happened, but that one didn't. Our lives may not always turn out as we wish or as we plan, but we are confident that if they had, then our happiness would have been unbounded and our sorrows thin and fleeting. I don't think I've ever felt anything close to that ever. Is that what he thinks? Oh, my dog's barking right now. Oh, if she wasn't barking, then everything would be perfect and happy. No, I don't think that. I don't know why she's barking though. It can't be people's trash because it's only Tuesday. Mm. Perhaps it's true that we can't always get what we want, but at least we feel sure that we know what to want in the first place. We know that happiness is to be found on the golf course and not on the assembly line. With Lana, but not with Lisa, as a potter, but not as a plumber, in Atlanta, but not in Afghanistan. And we know these things because we can look forward in time and simulate worlds that do not yet exist. Whenever we find ourselves on the front end of a decision, should I have another fish stick or go directly for the ding dongs? Accept the job in Kansas City or stay put and hope for a promotion, have the knee surgery or try the physical therapy first. We imagine the futures that our alternatives provide and then imagine how we would feel in each of them. If the surgery didn't work, I'd always regret not having given the physical therapy a chance. And we don't have to imagine very hard to know that we would be happier as the CEO of a Fortune 500 company than as the dead weight on a hangman's rope. Because we are the ape that looked forward, we don't actually have to live Adolf Fischer's or George Eastman's lives to know how it would feel to walk a mile in their shoes. Why does she keep barking? There's just one catch. The owners of the shoes didn't seem to agree with our conclusions. Fisher claimed to be happy. Eastman acted like a man who was not. So, unless these guys were wrong about how it felt to live their own lives, we are forced to consider the possibility that the mistake is ours. That when we try to imagine how it would feel to be in Fisher's or Eastman's situations, our imaginations failed us in some curious way. We are forced to consider the possibility that what clearly seems to be the better life may actually be the worst life, and that when we look down the timeline at the different lives we might lead, we may not always know which is which. We are forced to consider the possibility that we did something fundamentally wrong when we mentally slipped out of our shoes and into theirs, and that this fundamental mistake can cause us to choose the wrong future. She's like barking like crazy. I have no idea what is going on. She usually like only does this if somebody's out there, but who could be out there? I think it's crazy. George, no. What might this mistake be? Imagination is a powerful tool that allows us to conjure images from airy nothing. But like all tools, this one has its shortcomings. And in this and the next chapter, I'll tell you about the first of them. The best way to understand this particular shortcoming of imagination, the faculty that allows us to see the future, is to understand the shortcomings of memory, the faculty that allows us to see the past, and perception, the faculty that allows us to see the present. As you will learn, the shortcoming that causes us to misremember the past and misperceive the present is the very same shortcoming that causes us to misimagine the future. That shortcoming is caused by a trick that your brain plays on you every minute of every hour of every day. A trick that your brain is playing on you right now. Let me tell you the brain's dirty little secret. Oh my God, she's still barking like that. Like it's scaring me. Oh my God, where's my water? Little big head. Oh, I'm just hoping she'll stop soon. Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you for the manga. Mm. She's got to be hearing something outside. It could be just like a neighbor. I don't know. There is a marvelous moment in most of the early Marx Brothers films in which Harpo, the cherubic mime, reaches deep into the folds of his floppy trench coat and pulls out a flugelhorn, a steaming cup of coffee, a bathroom sink, or a sheet. By the age of 3, most of us have learned that big things can't go inside little things, and that understanding is violated to comic effect when someone pulls plumbing or livestock from his pockets. How can a flugelhorn fit inside a raincoat? How can that tiny heart hold all those merry clowns? How can the magician's assistant get folded up inside that little box? They can't, of course, and we know that, which is why we are so appreciative of the illusion that they do. Filling in memory, the human brain creates a similar illusion. If you've ever tried to store a full season of your favorite television show on your computer's hard drive, then you already know that faithful representations of things in the world require gobs of space. And yet, our brains make millions of snapshots, record millions of sounds, add smells, taste, textures, a third spatial dimension, a temporal sequence, a continuous running commentary, and they do this all day, every day, year after year, storing these representations of the world in a memory bank that seems never to overflow and yet allows us to recall at a moment's notice that awful day in the sixth grade when we teased Phil Mayers about his braces and he promised to beat us up after school. I can't remember a single thing about the sixth grade. I can't tell you what my teacher's name was, if they were a male, a female, where I lived. How do we cram the vast universe of our experience into the relatively small storage compartment between our ears? We do what Harpo did. We cheat. As you learned in the previous chapters, the elaborate tapestry of our experience is not stored in memory, at least not in its entirety. Rather, it is compressed for storage by first being reduced to a few critical threads, such as a summary phrase, dinner was disappointing, or a small set of key features, tough steak, corked wine, snotty waiter. Later, when we want to remember our experience, our brains quickly reweave the tapestry by fabricating, not by actually retrieving, the bulk of the information that we experience as a memory. This fabrication happens so quickly and effortlessly that we have the illusion, as a good magician's audience always does, that the entire thing was in our heads the entire time. But it wasn't, and that fact can be easily demonstrated. For example, volunteers in one study were shown a series of slides depicting a red car as it cruises toward a yield sign, turns right, and then knocks over a pedestrian. After seeing the slides, some of the volunteers, the no question group, were not asked any questions, and the remaining volunteers, the question group, were. The questions these volunteers were asked was this: did another car pass the red car while it was stopped at the stop sign? Next, all the volunteers were shown two pictures, one in which the red car was approaching a yield sign, and one in which the red car was approaching a stop sign, and were asked to point to the picture they had actually seen. Now, if the volunteers had stored their experience in memory, then they should have pointed to the picture of the car approaching the yield sign. And indeed, more than 90% of the volunteers in the no question group did just that. But 80% of the volunteers in the question group pointed to the picture of the car approaching a stop sign. Clearly, the question changed the volunteers' memories of their earlier experience, which is precisely what one would expect of if their brains were reweaving their experiences, and precisely what one would not expect if their brains were retrieving their experiences. This general finding that information acquired after an event alters memory of the event has been replicated so many times in so many different laboratory and field settings that it has left most scientists convinced of two things. What are you talking about? You just said 80% still remembered it right. That's That's the majority. What are you talking about? First, the act of remembering involves filling in details that were not actually stored. And second, we generally cannot tell when we are doing this because filling in happens quickly and unconsciously. Indeed, this phenomenon is so powerful that it happens when we know someone is trying to trick us. For example, read the list of words below, and when you finish, quickly cover the list with your hands. Then I will trick you. So here's his list of words, and they're listed like that, not like straight. Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy. Here's the trick. Which of the following words was not on the list? Bed, doze, sleep, or gasoline? The right answer is gasoline, of course, but the other answer is sleep. And if you don't believe me, then you should lift your hand from the page. Actually, you should lift your hand from the page in any case, as we really need to move along. If you're like most people, you knew gasoline was not on the list, but you mistakenly remembered reading the word sleep because all the words on the list are so closely related. Your brain stored the gist of what you read, a bunch of words about sleeping, rather than storing every one of the words. Normally, this would be a clever and economical strategy for remembering. The gist would serve as an instruction that enabled your brain to reweave the tapestry of your experience and allow you to remember reading the words you saw. But in this case, your brain was tricked by the fact that the gist word, the key word, the essential word, was not actually on the list. When your brain rewove the tapestry of your experience, it mistakenly included a word that was implied by the gist, but that had not actually appeared. Just as volunteers in the previous study mistakenly included a stop sign that was implied by the question they had been asked, but that had not actually appeared in the slides they saw. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Oh, 7.8. Mm. This experiment has been done dozens of times with dozens of different word lists. And these studies have revealed two surprising findings. First, people do not vaguely recall seeing the gist word, and they do not simply guess that they saw the gist word. Rather, they vividly remember seeing it, and they feel completely confident that it appeared. Second, this phenomenon happens even when people are warned about it beforehand. Knowing that a researcher is trying to trick you into falsely recalling the appearance of a gist word does not stop that false recollection from happening. Filling in perception. The powerful and undetectable filling in that suffuses our remembrances of things past pervades our perceptions of things present as well. For instance, if on one particularly slow Tuesday you took it upon yourself to dissect your eyeball, you would eventually come across a spot on the back of your retina where your optic nerve leaves your eye and wends its way toward your brain. The eyeball cannot register an image at the point at which the optic nerve attaches, and hence that point is known as the blind spot. No one can see an object that appears in the blind spot because there are no visual receptors there. And yet, if you look out into your living room, you do not notice a black hole in the otherwise smooth picture of your brother-in-law sitting on the sofa, devouring cheese dip. Why? Because your brain uses information from the areas around the blind spot to make a reasonable guess about what the blind spot would see if only it weren't blind. And then your brain fills in the scene with this information. That's right. It invents things, creates things, makes stuff up. It doesn't consult you about this, doesn't seek your approval. It just makes its best guess about the nature of the missing information and proceeds to fill in the scene. And the part of your visual experience of your cheese dipping brother in law that is caused by real light reflecting off of his real face, and the part that your brain just made up look exactly alike to you. You can convince yourself of this by closing your left eye, focusing your right eye on the magician in figure 8, and then bringing the book slowly toward you. I guess the magician is a picture of a man with like white hair. And then there's like a little planet on the other side of the page. I don't know. Um, it seems to disappear. You will suddenly see whiteness where the earth actually is because your brain sees whiteness all around the earth and thus mistakenly assumes there is whiteness in your blind spot as well. If you keep moving the book toward you, the earth will reappear. Eventually, of course, your nose will touch the rabbit and you will commit an unnatural act. Well, he's got a rabbit on it looks like a bar stool. The filling in trick is not limited to the visual world. Researchers tape recorded the sentence. The state governors met with their respective legislatures convening in the capital city. Then they doctored the tape, substituting a cough for the first S in legislatures. Volunteers heard the cough all right, but they heard it happening between the words because they heard the missing S too, even when they were specifically instructed to listen for the missing sound, and even when they were given thousands of trials of practice, volunteers were unable to name the missing letter that their brains knew ought to be there and had thus hopefully supplied. In an even more remarkable study, volunteers listened to a recording of the word eel, preceded by a cough, which I'll denote with an asterisk. The volunteers heard the word peel when it was embedded in the sentence the eel was on the orange, but they heard the word heel when it was embedded in the sentence the eel was on the shoe. Well, yeah, because it could just be like an accent. And we're not typically that rude in this country. People have different accents, so you just go along with what's most likely. It's not mishearing. This is a striking finding because the two sentences differ only in their final word, which means the volunteers' brains had to wait for the last word of the sentence before they could supply the information that was missing from the second word. But they did it, and they did it so smoothly and quickly that volunteers actually heard the missing information being spoken in its proper position. Experiments such as these provide us with a backstage pass that allows us to see how the brain does its marvelous magic act. Of course, if you went backstage at a magic show and got a good look at all the wires, mirrors, and trap doors, the show would be spoiled when you return to your seat. After all, once you know how a trick works, you can't fall for it, right? Well, if you go back and try the trick in figure 8 again, you will notice that despite the detailed scientific understanding of the visual blind spot that you acquired in the last few pages, the trick still works just fine. Indeed, no matter how much you learn about optics, and no matter how long you spend nosing up to that rabbit, the trick will never fail. How can that be? I have tried to convince you that things are not always as they appear. Now let me try to convince you that you can't help but believe that they are. The Meatloaf of Oz. Unless you skipped over childhood and went straight from strained carrots to mortgage payments. You probably remember the scene in the book The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, in which Dorothy and her pals are cowering before the great and terrible Oz, who appears menacingly as a giant floating head. Toto, the dog, suddenly breaks loose, knocks over a screen in the corner of the room, and reveals a little man working the controls of a machine. The protagonists are astonished, and the scarecrow accuses the little man of being a humbug. Exactly so, declared the little man, rubbing his hands together as if it pleased him. I am a humbug. Doesn't anyone else know you're a humbug? Asked Dorothy. No one knows it but you four and myself, replied Oz. I have fooled everyone so long that I thought I should never be found out. But I don't understand, said Dorothy in bewilderment. How was it that you appeared to me as a great head? That was one of my tricks, answered Oz. I think you're a very bad man, said Dorothy. Oh, no, my dear, really a very good man, but I'm a very bad wizard. Discovering idealism. Toward the end of the 18th century, philosophers had approximately the same sort of eye-opening experience that Dorothy had, and concluded, with some reluctance, that while the human brain is a very good organ, it is a very bad wizard. Prior to that time, philosophers had thought of the senses as conduits that allowed information about the properties of objects in the world to travel from the object and into the mind. The mind was like a movie screen in which the object was rebroadcast. The operation broke down on occasion, hence people occasionally saw things as they were not, but when the senses were working properly, they showed what was there. This theory of realism was described in 1690 by the philosopher John Locke. When our senses do actually convey into our understandings any idea, we cannot be satisfied that there doth something at that time really exist without us, which doth affect our senses, and by them give notice of itself to our apprehensive faculties, and actually produce that idea which we then perceive, and we cannot so far distrust their testimony, as no doubt that such collections of simple ideas as we have observed by our senses to be united together do really exist together. In other words, brains believe, but they don't make believe. When people see giant floating heads, it is because giant heads are actually floating in their purview. And the only question for a psychologically minded philosopher was how brains accomplish this amazing act of faithful reflection. But in 1781, a reclusive German professor named Immanuel Kant broke loose, knocked over the screen in the corner of the room, and exposed the brain as a humbug of the highest order. Kant's new theory of idealism claimed that our perceptions are not the result of a psychological process by which our eyes somehow transmit an image of the world into our brains, but rather they are the result of a physiological process by which our eyes process that combines what our eyes see with what we already think, feel, know, want, and believe, and then uses this combination of sensory information and pre-existing knowledge to construct our perception of reality. The understanding can intuit nothing. The senses can think nothing, can't row. Only through their union can knowledge arise. The historian Will Durant performed the remarkable feat of summarizing Kant's point in a single sentence. The world as we know it is a construction, a finished product. Almost, one might say, a manufactured article to which the mind contributes as much by its molding forms as the thing contributes by its stimuli. Kant argued that a person's perception of a floating head is constructed from the person's knowledge of floating heads, memory of floating heads, belief in floating heads, need for floating heads, and sometimes, but not always, from the actual presence of a floating head itself. Perceptions are portraits, not photographs, and their form reveals the artist's hand every bit as much as it reflects the things portrayed. I remember when Rex saw the Goodyear blimp, he couldn't believe his eyes. He tried to get up on the courtyard and just stare. Like he was just amazed by it. I'm like, what are you looking at? It was so funny. It wasn't because his mind constructed it. Like, how could a dog mentally construct a giant floating blimp? I'm sure that we've seen things. I mean, I guess I'm not sure, but I myself can think of that were real. I mean, I've seen things, or I've thought I saw things that I didn't, or misremembered, sure. But I've had things that were strange that I know are strange that I've seen. Harry, I read you the book. I think you were around then. It was short, but I did read it. Yeah. Mhm. This theory was a revelation, and in the centuries that followed, psychologists extended it by suggesting that each individual makes roughly the same journey of discovery that philosophy did. In the 1920s, the psychologist Jean Piaget noticed that the young child often fails to distinguish between her perception of an object and the object's actual properties. Hence, she tends to believe that things really are as they appear to be, and that others must therefore see them as she does. Well, you know what, Terry? They haven't gone over it yet, but probably the memory is affected if you haven't slept in 5 full days. You don't recall things as well, do you? Get some sleep. Mhm. Hence, she tends to believe that things really are as they appear to be, and that others must therefore see them as she does. When a 2-year old child sees her playmate leave the room and then sees an adult remove a cookie from a cookie jar and hide it in a drawer, she expects that her playmate will later look for the cookie in the drawer, despite the fact that her playmate was not in the room when the adult moved the cookie to the drawer from the jar. Why would she think that? I don't think so. Why? Because the 2-year-old child knows the cookie's in the drawer and thus expects that everyone else knows this as well. Without a distinction between things in the world and things in the mind, the child cannot understand how different minds can contain different things. Of course, with increasing maturity, children shift from realism to idealism, coming to realize that perceptions are merely points of view, that what they see is not necessarily what there is, and that two people may thus have different perceptions or beliefs about the same thing. Piaget concluded that the child is a realist in its thought and that its progress consists in ridding itself of this initial realism. In other words, like philosophers, ordinary people start out as realists but get over it soon enough. Escaping realism. If if realism goes away, it doesn't get very far. Research shows that even adults act like realists under certain circumstances. For example, in one study, a pair of adult volunteers were seated on opposite sides of cubby holes, as shown in Figure 9. Some common objects were placed in several of the cubbies. Some of these cubbies were open on both sides, so that items such as the large truck and the medium truck were clearly visible to both volunteers. Other cubbies were open on only one side, so that items such as the small truck could be seen by one volunteer but not the other. The volunteers played a game in which the person with the occluded view, the director, told the person with the clear view, the mover, to move certain objects to certain locations. Now, what should have happened when the director said, move the small truck to the bottom row? If the mover were an idealist, she would move the medium truck because she would realize that the director could not see the small truck. Hence, he must have been referring to the medium truck, which, from the director's point of view, was the smallest. On the other hand, if the mover were a realist, then she would move the small truck without regard for the fact that the director could not see it as she could. Hence, could not have been referring to it when he gave his instruction. So, which truck did the movers actually move? The medium truck, of course. What? Did you think they were stupid? These were normal adults. They had intact brains, good jobs, bank accounts, nice table manners, all the usual stuff. They knew that the director had a different point of view and thus must have been talking about the medium truck when he said, move the small truck. But while these normal adults with intact brains behaved like perfect idealists, their hands told only half the story. In addition to measuring the mover's hand movements, the researchers used an eye tracker to measure the mover's eye movements as well. The eye tracker revealed that the moment the mover heard the phrase, move the small truck, she briefly looked toward the small truck, not the medium truck, which was the smallest truck the director could see. But the small truck, which was the smallest truck that she could see. In other words, the mover's brain initially interpreted the phrase, the small truck, as a reference to the smallest truck from her own point of view, without regard for the fact that the director's point of view was different. Only after briefly flirting with the idea of moving the small truck did the mover's brain consider the fact that the director had a different view and thus must have meant the medium truck, at which point her brain sent the hand instructions to move the proper truck. The hand behaved like an idealist, but the eye revealed that the brain was a momentary realist. Experiments such as these suggest that we do not outgrow realism so much as we learn to outfox it, and that even as adults, our perceptions are characterized by an initial moment of realism. According to this line of reasoning, we automatically assume that our subjective experience of a thing is a faithful representation of the thing's properties. Only later, if we have the time, energy, and ability, do we rapidly repudiate that assumption and consider the possibility that the real world may not actually be as it appears to us. Piaget described realism as a spontaneous and immediate tendency to confuse the sign and the thing signified. And research shows that this tendency to equate our subjective sense of things with the objective properties of those things remains spontaneous and immediate throughout our lives. It does not go away forever, and it does not go away on occasion. Rather, it is brief, unarticulated, and rapidly unraveled. But it is always the first step in our perception of the world. We believe what we see and then unbelieve it when we have to. All of this suggests that the psychologist George Miller was right when he wrote, "The crowning intellectual accomplishment of the brain is the real world. The 3.5 pound meatloaf between our ears is not a simple recording device, but a remarkably smart computer that gathers information, makes shrewd judgments, and even shrewder guesses, and offers us its best interpretation of the way things are. Because those interpretations are usually so good, because they usually bear such a striking resemblance to the world as it actually is constituted, we do not realize that we are seeing an interpretation. Instead, we feel as though we are sitting comfortably inside our heads, looking out through the clear glass windshield of our eyes, watching the world as it truly is. We tend to forget our brains are talented forgers, weaving a tapestry of memory and perception whose detail is so compelling that its inauthenticity is rarely detected. In a sense, each of us is a counterfeiter who prints phony dollar bills and then happily accepts them for payment, unaware that he is both the perpetrator and victim of a well orchestrated fraud. As you are about to see, we sometimes pay a steep price for allowing ourselves to lose sight of this fundamental fact, because the mistake we make when we momentarily ignore the filling in trick and unthinkingly accept the validity of our memories and our perceptions is precisely the same mistake we make when we imagine our futures. An embarrassment of tomorrows. When John Lennon asked us to imagine there's no countries, he was quick to add, "It isn't hard to do." Indeed, imagination is usually effortless. When we think about the pastrami on rye that we intend to have for lunch, or the new pair of flannel pajamas that mom swears she mailed last week, we do not have to set aside a block of time between other appointments, roll up our sleeves, and get down to the serious work of conjuring up images of sandwiches and sleepwear. Rather, the moment we have the slightest inclination to consider these things, our brains effortlessly use what they know about delis and lunches and parcels and moms to construct mental pictures. Warm pastrami, dark rye, tartan plaid pajamas with bunny feet that we experience as the products of imagination, like perceptions and memories. These mental pictures pop into our consciousness fait accompli. We should be with which our imaginations provide this useful service. But because we do not consciously supervise the construction of these mental images, we tend to treat them as we treat memories and perceptions, initially assuming that they are accurate representations of the objects we are imagining. For instance, right now you can probably imagine a plate of spaghetti and tell me how much you would enjoy eating it for dinner tomorrow evening. Fine. Now, notice two things. First, this wasn't particularly taxing. You could probably imagine pasta all day long without ever breaking a sweat. letting your brain do all the heavy construction work while you lounge around in your new pajamas. Second, notice that the spaghetti you imagined was much richer than the spaghetti I asked you about. Perhaps your imaginary spaghetti was the goopy slop from the can, or perhaps it was fresh basil rosemary pasta topped with a silky bolognese. The sauce could have been tomato, cream, clam, or even grape jelly. The noodles might have been piled beneath a pair of traditional meatballs or sprinkled with a half dozen slivers of duck sausage studded with capers and pine nuts. Maybe you imagine eating the spaghetti while standing at your kitchen counter with a newspaper in one hand and a Coke in the other. Or maybe you imagine that your waiter had given you the small table near the fireplace at your favorite trattoria and poured you a fat 1990 Barolo to start. Whatever you imagine, it's a pretty good bet that when I said spaghetti, you did not have an unrequited urge to interrogate me about the nuances of sauce and locale before envisioning a single noodle. Instead, your brain behaved like a portrait artist commissioned to produce a full color oil from a rough charcoal sketch, filling in all the details that were absent from my question and serving you a particular heaping helping of imaginary pasta. And when you estimated your enjoyment of this future spaghetti, you responded to this particular mental image as you respond to particular memories and particular perceptions, as though the details had been specified by the thing you were imagining rather than fabricated by your brain. In doing so, you made an error that your future spaghetti eating self may regret. The phrase spaghetti for dinner tomorrow evening does not describe an event so much as it describes a family of events, and the particular member of the family that you imagined influenced your predictions about how much you'd enjoy eating it. Indeed, trying to predict how much you will enjoy a plate of spaghetti without knowing which plate of spaghetti it is like trying to predict how much you will pay for a car without knowing which car, Ferrari or Chevy, or trying to predict how proud you will be of your spouse's accomplishment without knowing which accomplishment, winning a Nobel Prize or finding the best divorce lawyer in the city, or trying to predict how sad you will be when a relative dies without knowing which relative, dear old dad or cranky great Uncle Sherman on cousin Ida's side twice removed. There are endless variations on spaghetti, and the particular variation you imagined surely influenced how much you expected to enjoy the experience, because these details are so crucial to an accurate prediction of your response to the events you were imagining. And because these important details were not known, you would have been wise to withhold your prediction about spaghetti, or at least to temper it with a disclaimer such as, I expect to like spaghetti if it is al dente with smoked pomodoro, but I'm willing to bet that you didn't withhold, you didn't disclaim, and that you instead conjured up a plate of imaginary spaghetti faster than Chef Boyardee on rollerblades, then made a confident prediction about the relationship you expected to have with that food. If you didn't do that, then congratulations. Give yourself a medal. But if you did, then no, you are not alone. Research suggests that when people make predictions about their reactions to future events, they tend to neglect the fact that their brains have performed the filling in trick as an integral part of the act of imagination. For example, volunteers in one study were asked to predict what they would do in a variety of future situations, how much time they would be willing to spend answering questions in a telephone survey, how much money they would be willing to spend to celebrate a special occasion at a restaurant in San Francisco, and so on. Volunteers also reported how confident they were on each of these predictions that they were correct. Before making predictions, some volunteers were asked to describe all the details of the future event they were imagining. I am imagining eating wine braised short ribs with roast root vegetables and parsley coulis at Jardinier, and were then told that they should assume that each of these details was perfectly accurate. The assumers. Other volunteers were not asked to describe these details and were not told to make any assumptions. The results showed that non-assumers were every bit as confident as assumers were. Why? Because they were asked about dinner. The non-assumers quickly and unconsciously generated a mental image of a particular dish at a particular restaurant and then assumed that these details were accurate, rather than having been conjured from airy nothing. We all find ourselves in the same fix from time to time. Our spouse asks us to attend a party next Friday night. Our brains instantly manufacture an image of a cocktail party in the penthouse of a downtown hotel. Why would you imagine that? With waiters in black tie carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres past a slightly bored harpist, and we predict our reaction to the imagined event with a yawn that sets new records for duration and jaw extension. What we generally fail to consider is how many different kinds of parties there are: birthday celebrations, gallery openings, cast parties, yacht parties, office parties, orgies, wakes, and how different our reactions would be to each. So we tell our spouse that we'd rather skip the party. Our spouse naturally drags us along anyhow, and we have a truly marvelous time. Why? Because the party involved cheap beer and hula hoops rather than classical music and seaweed crackers. It was precisely our style, and we liked what we predicted we'd hate because our prediction was based on a detailed image that reflected our brain's best guess, which was in this case dead wrong. Yeah, in your made up case about yourself, you're wrong. What the hell does that apply to anything else? The point here is that when we imagine the future, we often do so in the blind spot of our mind's eye, and this tendency can cause us to misimagine the future events whose emotional consequences we are attempting to weigh. I haven't seen him really example this at all. First of all, if you ask somebody to imagine blank, filling whatever, they just do it as a courtesy, right? It's like writing prompts. Um, I often will take an old photo, like that doesn't belong to me, that's hundreds of years before I was born or whatever, and I make up a story about it. It's like a game in the mind. So asking your mind to imagine and fill in the blank a fruit. Like it's just a game. It's not, oh, but what if you got the fruit wrong? What are you talking about? You just asked me to imagine something. If you want me to predict, like to actually predict something, it's a hell of a lot more likely to be right. Okay, where was I? This tendency transcends mundane predictions about parties, restaurants, and plates of spaghetti. For example, most of us have no doubt that we would enjoy being an Eastman more than we would enjoy being a Fisher. No doubt. That is, unless we pause to consider how quickly and unquestioningly our brains filled in the details of their lives and deaths, and how much all those made up details mattered. Consider a pair of stories that your brain almost certainly did not invent for you at the beginning of this chapter. You are a young German immigrant who lives in the teeming, dirty city that is 19th century Chicago. A few wealthy families, the Armors, McCormicks, Swifts, and Fields, have monopolize their industries and have the right to use you and your family as they would use machines and horses. You devote your time to a small newspaper whose editorials call for social justice, but you are no fool. And you know that these essays will change nothing and that the factories will churn on, producing paper, producing pork, producing tractors, and spitting out the tired workers whose blood and sweat feed the engines of production. You are dispensable and insignificant. Welcome to America. One evening, an altercation breaks out between some factory workers and the local police in Haymarket Square, and although you were not present when the bomb was thrown, you are rounded up with other anarchist leaders and charged with masterminding a riot. Suddenly, your name is on the front page of every major newspaper, and you have a national platform for your opinions. Oh, thank you again, Rob, for the rose. I did not predict you would send me that. Mm. You'd be the favorite student. Harvard party. Well, yeah, maybe that's what he's talking about. His examples are so ridiculous. Most of the time that you're assuming something, you're right. When the judge sentences you on the basis of fabricated evidence, you realize that this ignoramus moment will be preserved in history books and you will be known as the Haymarket Martyr, and that your execution will pave the way for the reforms you sought but were impotent to establish. A few decades from now, there will be a far better America than this one, and its citizens will honor you for your sacrifice. You are not a religious man, but you cannot help but think for a moment of Jesus on the cross, falsely accused, unjustly convicted, and cruelly executed, giving his life so that a great idea might live in the centuries to come. As you prepare to die, you feel nervous, of course, but in some deep sense, this moment is a stroke of luck, the culmination of a dream, perhaps you might even say, the happiest moment of your life. Cut to a second story. Rochester, New York, 1932. The midst of the Great Depression. You are a 77-year-old man who has spent his life building empires, advancing technology, and using your wealth to endow libraries, symphonies, colleges, and dental clinics that have improved the lives of millions. The happiest moments of your long life were spent tinkering with a camera, touring Europe's art museums, fishing, hunting, or doing carpentry in your lodge in North Carolina. But spinal disease has made it increasingly difficult for you to lead the active life you've always enjoyed, and every day you spend in bed is a sad mockery of the vibrant man you once were. You will never get younger, you will never get better. The good days are over, and more days merely mean more decrepitude. I'm sorry, that just sounds like something I would say about myself. I don't know. One Monday afternoon, you sit down at your desk, uncap your favorite fountain pen, and write these words on a legal pad. Dear friends, my work is done. Why wait? Then you light a cigarette, and when you've enjoyed the last of it, stub it out and carefully place the nose of your Luger automatic against your chest. Your physician showed you how to locate your heart, and now you can feel it beating rapidly beneath your hand. As you prepare to pull the trigger, you feel nervous, of course, but in some deep sense, you know that this one well-aimed bullet will allow you to leave a beautiful past and escape a bitter future. Okay, lights up. These details about Adolf Fischer's and George Eastman's lives are accurate, but that's not really the point. The point is that just as there are parties and pastas you like and parties and pastas you don't, there are always ways, or there are ways of being rich and ways of being executed that make the former less marvelous and the latter less awful than we might otherwise expect. One reason why you found Fisher's and Eastman's reaction so perverse is that you will almost certainly misimagine the details of their situations, and yet, without a second thought, you behaved like an unrepentant realist and confidently based your predictions about how you would feel on details that your brain had invented while you weren't watching. Your mistake was not imagining things you would not know. That is, after all, what imagination is for. Rather, your mistake was in unthinkingly treating what you imagined as though it were an accurate representation of the facts. You are a very fine person, I'm sure, but you are a very bad wizard. I didn't, what are you talking about? I didn't imagine any of those things. I think one would have to figure for someone to kill themselves, they're not happy for some reason. And the other one, for him to say that, people say things all the time. I mean, when they're about to be executed, I mean, come on. Onward. If you'd been given your choice of brains at the moment of conception, you probably wouldn't have chosen the tricky one. Good thing no one asked you. Without the filling in trick, you would have sketchy memories, an empty imagination, and a small black hole following you wherever you went. When Kant wrote that perception without conception is blind, he was suggesting that without the filling in trick, we would have nothing even remotely resembling the subjective experience that all of us take for granted. We see things that aren't really there, and we remember things that didn't really happen. And while these may sound like symptoms of mercury poisoning, they are actually critical ingredients in the recipe for a seamlessly smooth and blessedly normal reality. But that smoothness and normality come at a price. Even though we are aware in some vaguely academic sense that our brains are doing the filling in trick, we can't help but expect the future to unfold with the details we imagine. As we are about to see, the details that the brain puts in are not nearly as troubling as the details it leaves out. That's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 is called The Hound of Silence. Okay, but first, what was the point of that chapter? Like, that was supposed to explain to me that, hey, guess what? People are like always wrong about the future, right? Because like if I ask you to like imagine having spaghetti tomorrow, wrong. How do you know it'd be that exact spaghetti? What the hell? See? And therein I've proven my point. You can't predict nothing. No, you know how you can predict things? Go on like an app or whatever about like for spaghetti, right? And you'll see what's the most reordered thing. Meaning, what do people buy and then like buy again? And you know why they buy it again? That's right, because they have a pretty fair assumption that they're going to like it and how it's going to be. If they didn't, they wouldn't buy it again. They may realize at some point they may worsen the ingredients and worsen the product. People know it's possible, so they're taking a guess. But the fact is, most of people's predictions are right. My dog's going to bark again someday. Yeah, I'm sure that I'm right. Oh, hateful error, melancholy's child, why dost thou show to the apt thoughts of men the things that are not? Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Silver Blaze hadn't been missing for long when Inspector Gregory and Colonel Ross identified the stranger who had sneaked into the stable and stolen the prize racehorse. But, as usual, Sherlock Holmes was one step ahead of the police. The colonel turned to the great detective. Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention? To the curious incident of the dog in the night time. The dog did nothing in the night time. That was the curious incident, remarked Sherlock Holmes. It seemed that a dog lived in the stable, that both of the stable hands had slept through the theft, and that these two facts had allowed Holmes to make one of his indubitably shrewd deductions, as he later explained. I had grasped the significance of the silence of the dog. A dog was kept in the stables, and yet, though someone had been in and had fetched out a horse, he had not barked enough to arouse the two lads in the loft. Obviously, the midnight visitor was someone whom the dog knew well. Although the inspector and the colonel were aware of what had happened, only Holmes was aware of what hadn't happened. The dog hadn't barked, which meant that the thief was not the stranger whom the police had identified. By paying careful attention to the absence of an event, Sherlock Holmes further distinguished himself from the rest of humankind. As we are about to see, when the rest of humankind imagines the future, it rarely notices what imagination has missed, and the missing pieces are much more important than we realize. The sailor's note. If you live in a city with tall buildings, then you already know that pigeons have an uncanny ability to defecate at precisely the moment, speed, and position required to score a direct hit on your most expensive sweater. Given their talent as bombardiers, it seems odd that pigeons can't learn to do much simpler things. For example, if a pigeon is put in a cage with two levers that can be briefly illuminated, it can easily learn to press the illuminated lever to get a reward of bird seed, but it can never learn to press the unilluminated lever to receive the same reward. Pigeons have no trouble figuring out that the presence of a light signals an opportunity for eating, but they cannot learn the same thing about the absence of a light. Oh, I bet you can prove that wrong. I bet you can totally prove that wrong. Research suggests that human beings are a bit like pigeons in this regard. For example, volunteers in one study played a deduction game in which they were shown a set of trigrams, a three-letter combination such as SXY, GTR, BCG, and EVX. The experimenter then pointed to one of the trigrams and told the volunteers that this trigram was special. The volunteer's job was to figure out what made the trigram special. That is, to figure out which feature of the special trigram distinguished it from the others. Volunteers saw set after set, and each time the experimenter pointed out the special one. How many sets did volunteers have to see before they deduced the distinctive feature of the special trigram? For half of the volunteers, the special trigram was distinguished by the fact that it contained the letter T, and these volunteers needed to see about 34 sets of trigrams before they figured out that the presence of T is what made the trigram special. For the other half of the volunteers, the special trigram was always distinguished by the fact that it, and only it, lacked the letter T. The results were astounding. No matter how many sets of trigrams they saw, none of the volunteers ever figured this out. It was easy to notice the presence of a letter, but like the barking of a dog, it wasn't possible to notice its absence. Absence in the present. If this tendency were restricted to birdseed and trigrams, we wouldn't care much about it. But as it turns out, the general inability to think about absences as a point is a potent source for error in everyday life. For example, a moment ago, I suggested that pigeons have an unusual talent for hitting pedestrians. And if you've ever been the victim of a really good splotching, you probably concluded the same thing. But what makes us think that pigeons are actually taking aim and hitting what they aim for? The answer is that most of us can remember far too many instances in which we momentarily passed beneath a ledge festooned with these obnoxious flying rats and were squarely nailed by a stinky white dollop, despite the fact that from the air a human head constitutes a relatively small and fast moving target. Fair enough, but if we really want to know whether the pigeons are out to get us and have the requisite skills to do so, we must also consider the times when we walked beneath the ledge and came away clean. The right way to calculate the animosity and marksmanship of the urban pigeon is to consider both the presence and the absence of poop on our jackets. If the pigeons have hit us 9 times out of 10, then we should probably give them credit for their accuracy as well as a wide berth. But if they've hit us 9 times out of 9,000, then what seems like good aim and bad attitude is probably nothing more than dumb luck. The misses are crucial to determining what kinds of inferences we can legitimately draw from the hits. Indeed, when scientists want to establish the causal relationship between two things, cloud seeding and rain, heart attacks and cholesterol, you name it, they compute a mathematical index that takes into account co-occurrences. How many people who do have high cholesterol do have heart attacks? And non-concurrence. How many people who do have high cholesterol do not have heart attacks? And how many people who do not have high cholesterol do have heart attacks? And co-absences. How many people who don't have high cholesterol don't have heart attacks? All of these quantities are necessary to assess accurately the likelihood that the two things have a real causal relationship. This is all very sensible, of course, to statisticians, but studies show that when ordinary people want to know whether two things are causally related, they routinely search for, attend to, consider, and remember information about what did happen and fail to search for, attend to, consider, and remember information about what did not. Apparently, people have been making this mistake for a very long time. Nearly 4 centuries ago, the philosopher and scientist Sir Francis Bacon wrote about the ways in which the mind errs, and he considered the failure to consider absences among the most serious. By far the greatest impediment and aberration of the human understanding arises from the fact that those things which strike the sense outweigh things which, although they may be more important, do not strike it directly. Hence, contemplation usually ceases with seeing, so much so that little or no attention is paid to things invisible. Bacon illustrated his point with a story, which it turns out he borrowed from Cicero, who told it 17 centuries earlier about a visitor to a Roman temple. To impress the visitor with the power of the gods, the Roman showed him a portrait of several pious sailors whose faith had presumably allowed them to survive a recent shipwreck. When pressed to accept this as evidence of a miracle, the visitor astutely inquired, "But where are the pictures of those who perished after taking their vows?" Scientific research suggests that ordinary folks like us rarely ask to see pictures of the missing sailors. Our inability to think about absences can lead us to make some fairly bizarre judgments. For example, in a study done about 3 decades ago, Americans were asked which countries were most similar to each other, Ceylon and Nepal, or West Germany and East Germany. Most picked the latter pair, but when they were asked which countries were most dissimilar, most Americans picked the latter pair as well. Now, how can one pair of countries be more similar and more dissimilar than another pair? They can, of course, but when people are asked to judge the similarity of two countries, they tend to look for the presence of similarities, of which East and West Germany had many, for example, their names, and ignore the absence of similarities. When they are asked to judge the dissimilarities of the two countries, they tend to look for the presence of dissimilarities. of which East and West Germany had many, for example, their governments, and ignore the absence of dissimilarities. The tendency to ignore absences can befuddle more personal decisions as well. For example, imagine that you are preparing to go on a vacation to one of two islands, Madeiracia, which has an average weather, average beaches, average hotels, and average nightlife, or Extremia, which has beautiful weather and fantastic beaches, but crummy hotels and no nightlife. The time has come to make your reservation. So, which one would you choose? Most people pick Extremia, but now imagine that you are already holding tentative reservations for both destinations and the time has come to cancel one of them before they charge your credit card. Which would you cancel? Most people would choose to cancel their reservation to Extremia. Why would people both select and reject Extremia? Because when we are selecting, we consider the positive attributes of our alternatives. And when we are rejecting, we consider the negative attributes. Extremia has the most positive attributes and the most negative attributes. Hence, people tend to select it when they are looking for something to select, and they reject it when they're looking for something to reject. Of course, the logical way to select a vacation is to consider both the presence and the absence of positive and negative attributes. But that's not what most of us do. Absence in the future. Our inattention to absences influences the way that we think about the future. Just as we do not remember every detail of a past event, what color socks did you wear to your high school graduation? Or see every detail of a current event. What color socks is the person behind you wearing at this very moment? So, do we fail to imagine every detail of a future event? You could close your eyes right now and spend 2 full hours imagining yourself driving around in a Mercedes-Benz SL600 Roadster with a twin turbocharged 36-valve 5.5-liter V12 engine. You could imagine the curve of the front grille, the slant of the windshield, and the newish smell of the black leather upholstery. But no matter how long you've spent doing this, if I were then to ask you to inspect the mental image you had created and read to me the numbers on the license plate, you would be forced to admit that you'd left out that particular detail. No one can imagine everything, of course, and it would be absurd to suggest that they should. But just as we tend to treat the details of future events that we do imagine as though they were actually going to happen, we have an equally troubling tendency to treat the details of future events that we don't imagine as though they were not going to happen. In other words, we fail to consider how much imagination fills in, but we also fail to consider how much it leaves out. To illustrate this point, I often ask people to tell me how they would think they would feel 2 years after the sudden death of their eldest child. As you can probably guess, this makes me quite popular at parties. I know. I'm sure that's very funny. This is a gruesome exercise, and I'm not asking you to do it, but the fact is that if you did, you probably would give me the answer that almost everyone gives me, which is some variation of, "Are you out of your damn mind?" I'd be devastated, totally devastated. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. I might even kill myself. So, who invited you to this party anyway? If at this point I'm not actually wearing the person's cocktail, I usually probe a bit further and ask how he came to his conclusion. What thoughts or images came to mind? What information did he consider? People typically tell me that they imagined hearing the news, or they imagined attending the funeral, or they imagined opening the door to an empty bedroom. But in my long history of asking this question, and thereby excluding myself from every social circle to which I formerly belonged, I have yet to hear a single person tell me that in addition to these heartbreaking, morbid images, They also imagine the other things that would inevitably happen in the 2 years following the death of their child. Indeed, not one person has ever mentioned attending another child's school play or making love with his spouse or eating a taffy apple on a warm summer evening or reading a book or writing a book or riding a bicycle or any of the many other activities that we and they would expect to happen in those 2 years. Now, I am in no way, shape, or form suggesting that a bite of a gooey candy compensates for the loss of a child. That isn't the point. What I am suggesting is that the 2 year period following a tragic event has to contain something. That is, it must be filled with episodes and occurrences of some kind. And these episodes and occurrences must have some emotional consequences. Yeah, probably. So, like, you might not be able to enjoy your candy because it caused you a horrified shaking, and the shaking, it can be almost like a seizure where you fall to the ground and lose your teeth. You could, like, hit your head, and your, brain damage prevents you from being able to eat properly again. Maybe they didn't want to imagine something like that. The damage that leads to more damage, that leads to more damage, that leads to more damage. It's really a fun cycle. Regardless of whether these consequences are large or small, negative or positive, one cannot answer my question accurately without considering them. And yet, not one single person I know has ever imagined anything other than the single awful event suggested by my question. When they imagine the future, there is a whole lot missing, and the things that are missing matter. All right, we'll pick it up there tomorrow. He thinks that nobody considers um things that many people do, but it's not like, oh, okay. So did you know, like, there's a new Avengers movie coming out next year? Okay. Or is it this year? Okay, but did you imagine what color pants you're gonna wear to it? I bet you didn't, huh? So aren't I so clever? What? No, because it doesn't fucking matter. Like, what are you talking about? I love you. Stay warm. I'm gonna take these off. Um, I never had a graduation, so I don't know what socks I would have worn. Was homeschooled. I had to drop out so I could get I could work at Target full time. So I was issued a certificate in the mail of a graduation completion, a diploma. Yeah, they would call it. Sorry. And what sock? I don't even think I was wearing socks when I came. I was probably wearing my pajamas. Not always one for socks. Although you got to wear your socks tonight. I like to put creams on things for my feet, but then it can be cold. Like I noticed my sweater. Maybe you could throw it in the. Maybe I could throw it in like the dryer. Just like putting something on, like just um the clothes themselves, like the material, like cold. Yeah, my hair is probably like cold. Anyway, I know I'm in the desert. Why am I complaining? But it's cold. I'm gonna find out why the dog is in fact barking. Get some rest. I do hope I see you tomorrow. I don't know. She might come tomorrow. If she doesn't, then Sunday probably. But also, yeah, maybe Friday also. But also maybe both. So I will keep you posted. Mwah. Good night.